Hello, and welcome to Fairview Baptist Church. I'm Pastor John Boyacek. I'm so glad you could join us in worship today. I trust that you will be blessed.
Well, good morning. How's everyone? Okay, I heard mostly goods. Okay. Well, that's good. This morning, I'm going to be sharing some thoughts on discipleship. Okay? And so let's get to the word that I'm going to read from the word. This, of course, is the Great Commission, which I think everyone is probably familiar with, but I'm going to read it nevertheless. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." Lord, as I attempt to unpack some of this, Lord, I just pray that you would guide my words, and Lord, that your purposes would be accomplished through it. How many of you have been to this restaurant? Okay? Was it a positive experience? Okay. Oh, I saw someone shaking their head no. Okay. Most people, I know, there was a gasp I heard from this side of the room in particular when somebody was shaking their head. Chick-fil-A is a popular American quick serve, because they don't like to call themselves fast food anymore, quick serve restaurant, and they serve a really good chicken sandwich. Now, I know we're not quite at lunchtime, but you're all going to be wondering where the closest one is. I think it's Barrie.
It's closed Sundays.
It's true. It's true. It's closed Sunday, so sorry, as much as I may be talking about that. Recently, I seem to have been having a number of conversations about this particular restaurant. I was talking to Pastor Dave about it this week, and then I was like, you know what, it actually kind of works for the message I want to bring, so here we are. And a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to Matt Hayden, who some of you would know, related to a few folks here. He's a pastor up at Fenland. And he was sharing a story about his son, Ben. And so they also like Chick-fil-A. And his son, Ben, came in with them to the restaurant. And, you know, they take your order and all this kind of thing. And so he had heard somewhere something about you might get a free sandwich if you sing the Chick-fil-A song. Can't blame the kid, right? Hey, like, who doesn't want a free chicken sandwich? So he cleared his throat, went up to the person at the cash and said, "Hey, would you give me a free sandwich if I sang this song?" And the person said, "Well, we don't have a policy on that." But the worker said, "Sing it, and I will pay for your sandwich." So he cleared his throat and started, I'm not going to be signing up for the worship team anytime soon, but it's to the tune of Yesterday for all of you Beatles fans. And it starts with, "Chick-fil-A, I could eat there 7 times a day, where the people laugh and children play. Oh, I'm in love with Chick-fil-A. Suddenly, I need waffle fries in front of me, with some nuggets and a large sweet tea. Oh, Chick-fil-A, you set me free. Kids, get in the van, we can go there today. Oh, but their stores are closed, I know, 'cause it's Sunday. Chick-fil-A. What a dirty, rotten trick to play. Now I have to settle for Subway. Oh, I'm in love with Chick-fil-A." So he got a free sandwich. And in the retelling I heard, the manager even came over and said, "Hey, do you want a milkshake too?" And I don't think Ben quite realized it was being offered free because the manager came over. So I don't know if I'm going to get a free sandwich out of that or not. But Chick-fil-A is immensely profitable. In my other job, I teach business. And so I had to give you some stats. I had to talk about their business success. Chick-fil-A restaurants generate higher revenue per location than any other U.S. chain. That is remarkable, considering also they're also closed Sunday, where all of their competitors are open 7 days a week. They still outsell them big time. Most locations average about 8.1 million in sales. By the way, that's twice the average that a McDonald's does. That is honestly very shocking. And they've got 2,700 franchises, 47 states, Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, and Canada. So you could do the math, 8.1 million per location, and that kind of tells you the size of this particular enterprise. Really quite a remarkable company. But what business are they in? What business are they in? Well, if you ask the owner, the founder, I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce his name correctly, but Truett, does that sound right? Truett Cathy. We're not just in the chicken business, we're in the people business. I've also heard it said where he says, we're not in the chicken business, we're in the people business. I thought that was quite interesting, right? It's interesting that they're having this on the one side, this operational success. If you've been there, and I won't tell you how many times I've been there in the last 7 weeks, because you might think I have a problem. I didn't just sing the song. I also went to Chick-fil-A several times on holidays. You've seen how in their drive-thru, like it is a well-oiled machine. Like they come out to your car, they take the order, it's really, really well done. And so I tip my hat to them, but what business are they in? Well, they're in the people business. And I thought that was very interesting, because that's the founder, that's the owner saying, it's actually more important, this thing of people, even though we have all of this success. So my question to us is, what business are we in? And now I'm speaking to the church here, okay? So if you don't know Christ, that is a prerequisite to much of the conversation we're having. And you do need Christ, certainly, because that is the start on a discipleship journey. But what business are we in? I sometimes catch myself because I sometimes think I'm only in the business of raising up believers. Okay? Now, I don't think anyone would argue that that is one of the things that we do. Okay? But let me just go back a couple slides here. Go and make believers of all nations? No, that's not what it says. It says go and make disciples of all nations. And so I know I sometimes operate on the, well, let's just make sure they say the prayer, let's make sure they're a believer, and we're good. Well, yes, that's important. Of course that's important. But it doesn't stop there, right? That actually wasn't Christ's command. It wasn't go and make believers of all nations. It was actually go and make disciples of all nations. Sorry, I've learned this clicker works only on this side, so if you see me always sort of gravitating, it's not just I'm showing, favoritism to this crew here. So what business are we in? Is it believers? Is it raising up servants? Well, I don't think anyone would argue the same, that we shouldn't be serving, right? But is that what Christ commanded? Go and make servants of all nations. Well, no. Are we in the business of running events? Are we in the business of creating great program? Or are we discipling disciples? Discipleship certainly can include those things, right? But if we just stop at, hey, salvation card signed, check. Well, that's actually not what Christ commanded. So why do we sometimes substitute these other businesses, right? I'm not saying we do it purposefully. I wouldn't say that I've done it purposefully, but sometimes we do. In the business world, you may have heard this slogan, what gets measured gets done. Anyone heard that? What gets measured gets done? Okay, a few of you. And so if you don't measure it, the employees aren't going to do it, right? You say, we want to do this. If you don't measure it, it's a goal that's just going to go nowhere. I would suggest to you, discipleship is difficult to measure, right? How do you measure successful discipleship? Difficult, right? There might be some proxies, some things that we might be able to, get an idea, but it's often difficult, right? And so sometimes we focus on excellent program, right? I love running program. I love doing events. Who doesn't, enjoy a really successful youth event, right? The youth should all be like cheering now, and you guys were all supposed to be in the third row, but at least a few of you did. Thank you. I was hoping to have a little bit of a youth squad there. Who doesn't like well-oiled programs, right? That work really well. We all love that, and frankly, that's often easier than discipleship. Making believers is quicker, right? If our criteria is, all right, how many people said the prayer or whatever we want to say, well, that's measurable. That's very measurable. Sometimes we're too busy, right? What I want to articulate, and I think I've articulated it, but let me just make sure I'm really clear on this particular point. It's not that I'm saying program, raising up believers, servanthood. I'm not putting any of those down, right? Because we all agree that those are important. But they can be so much better if we are working within the context of discipleship. Now, I haven't unpacked that just yet, but it's the good versus best, right? Those are good things. But could they be better? A couple questions crossed my mind this week. Now, I was preparing for this message, and I was trying to find a verse on discipleship. I was trying to find a whole passage where Jesus unpacks discipleship. Preferably Jesus, I would have gone with Paul too, where he just unpacks it. And I was really having trouble. As I'm reading through all the interactions that Christ had with his disciples, I didn't really find, and maybe you found one, but I didn't find a verse that really outlined discipleship really well for me. I saw a ton of verses where Jesus was discipling, but he was always discipling in the context of something else, right? So he's teaching the crowd in parables, and then he goes and speaks to the disciples privately to explain it. It was always in the context of something else. And so I started to ask the question, actually two questions. The first one was, can we do kingdom work? I put it in brackets because I've left that very vague purposefully, because kingdom work, things that are advancing the kingdom of God, can look very different. So I didn't want to nail it down too much. But can we do kingdom work without discipling? Interesting question. My personal conclusion was, yeah, we can. Should we is a totally different question. But can we? Well, it seems that we can, because I think I've been guilty of it before. Serving or bringing someone to be a believer. Those are all kingdom things, and those are good. But can I do it without discipling? Yeah, I think, unfortunately, I could. Is it as effective as it could be? Consider if Christ had not used 12 disciples. Just him, right? Much of the things we read of him, well, actually we wouldn't have read it, right? Because who wrote those books? They were either the disciples or being relayed to the disciples. Okay, so we might have a bit of a problem there, but even if we somehow had the story of exactly what happened, would it have been as effective? Because although Christ was doing his own kingdom work, he was bringing his disciples with him. He was sending out his disciples. His disciples were working on his behalf, and consider the amplification effect of that. Very interesting. Christ's ministry, if we were to remove the disciples who he poured into, we are the result of that discipling, right? Generation after generation after generation. Another question that I came across is our kingdom service as joyful as it could be? Now, don't raise your hands for this one, please. Do you sometimes find serving kingdom work not terribly fun, right? Let's be honest. Now, again, I told you not to raise your hands, so please don't. It's true. Sometimes kingdom work isn't a joy, right? I wonder sometimes, and this is just my own thoughts, why I named our message today, Thoughts on Discipleship. I wonder if the lack of discipleship is one of the reasons why sometimes kingdom service isn't maybe as joyful as it could be. I know from my own experience in youth ministry, I've been at a few different churches serving in youth ministry, different roles. The one, honestly, that I think I've had the most fun at is probably the one I grew the most at. And I was not the guy in charge of the youth ministry there. There was somebody else. He was leading the youth ministry, and every couple of weeks, he took me out for coffee, and he discipled me. He didn't call it that, but he did it. And serving in that youth ministry was an absolute joy, right? There was so much connection. Now, I'm not saying ministry, kingdom work will always be a joy. No, I'm not saying that. But I wonder if sometimes the lack of joy that we sometimes have, maybe is because we are not being poured into and we are not pouring into others, because there's actually joy from both sides of that, right? I don't know about you, but I enjoy being poured into and I enjoy pouring into others. And so, interesting. Can we disciple apart from kingdom work? Okay, so actually a different question. The first one was, can we do kingdom work without discipling? And the answer was, I think we can, but there's a question on joy and effectiveness. The second question here is, can we disciple apart from kingdom work? My own conclusion, for the moment at least, is that I'm not sure we can. Because all the examples I kept finding in Scripture, if you're looking at Christ and his disciples, if you're looking at Paul and Timothy, if you're looking at even, if we go, OT, Moses and Joshua, they were doing kingdom work and they were bringing their disciples along with them and using that. And so I'm not convinced we can, and there's a few examples, just really a few there of Christ's interactions with his discipling, and they're always in the context of his kingdom work. Can you pour into someone without it being discipleship? Sure it can. But that's just mentorship, right? There's nothing wrong with mentorship, right? There's a lot of talk, a lot of books in the business world written about mentorship and all that kind of stuff. And there's value, but it's not discipleship, right? Discipleship has a kingdom purpose, right? It has a kingdom purpose. Are we mutually encouraging one another, pouring into somebody to help them be more Christ-like? Again, this message is not exhaustive to say the least, but some quick thoughts on how do we disciple more effectively. Well, I'll start with the last point. Can we intentionally align kingdom work priorities to elevate discipleship? Okay? What's more important, the well-oiled youth event or pouring into some youth and those youth are helping to run the event and maybe the event doesn't go perfectly? I think the latter is more important, right? We can maybe understand that our priorities are not so much about the event, our priorities are not so much some of those things that are maybe easily measured, but we can still accomplish them, and frankly, that impact of discipling those youth or those youth leaders is going to go far beyond the particular event that we're talking about. How do we disciple more effectively? Follow Christ's example. We could spend weeks, more years. Frankly, Christian thought has spent thousands of years unpacking Christ's interactions with his disciples. So I will simply direct you there. Study biblical examples also, because there's certainly many, not just Christ and his followers. When is a disciple done? Not sure we quite have an answer to that, but I would make a comment. Disciples disciple disciples who disciple. And yes, I think that's grammatically correct. At least I hope it is. Disciples disciple disciples who disciple, right? So I can disciple someone. The goal isn't just to get them to a particular place, right? There are certainly some tangible things that we could look at about becoming more like Christ, but the goal is always that they can disciple. And not just that they can disciple one more generation, that they can disciple the generation to disciple the next generation, right? Recursion, for those of you who are into computer programming or things like that. So, to conclude the message part of my message, what business are we in? Back to Truett Cathy. I'm not just in the, what would we want to fill in there? Right? Because it could be different for each of us, right? Each of us have different callings, different things that we gravitate towards in the kingdom, right? I'm not just in the youth event business, I could put in that. We're in the discipleship business. Right? I'm not just in the, right? What might you put in there? Notice it starts off with, I'm not just in, but we're in the discipleship business, because there's no one person's responsibility. That concludes the formal message part. I have been asked to share a little bit of thoughts on youth ministry and sort of the vision that I have. Now, I think the first part may have enlightened you to some of my thoughts on that, so that was intentional. But I do want to let everyone know a few realities. Right now, average youth week, we have about 30 plus youth. This is junior high and senior high. This is honestly one of the largest groups that I have had the privilege of serving with. It is really great to see that number of youth. We have very few leaders. We are planned to protect covered, but just barely sometimes. And so there is a need. We need regular leaders, right? Those who are willing to commit every week. We need leaders who are occasional. That's cool, right? We need occasional ones. I know folks who are, maybe a little closer in age to myself. We have busy lives, right? And so committing to every week, is difficult, okay? And I totally get that. But I also know that I want intentionally to have people who have walked with the Lord for decades involved in youth leadership. Because we often can't disciple further than where we're at, right? And so I want to make sure that we have a variety of youth leaders, right? We need lots of people. And so if you're thinking, oh, I'm too old for youth ministry, the mentor I shared with, who was discipling me, he was well into his 50s when he was running this particular youth ministry and pouring into his leaders. And so that gives me hope, right? That gives me hope that I could maybe be doing this, maybe even older than that, who knows? But we do have a need. If you are interested, certainly contact me, but know that I'm going to be taking you out for coffee frequently, because it's not just about the event. I want to do what I can to pour into you, and you'll probably pour into me also. And that is a priority, because that is going to overflow into the youth ministry. There's only so many people that you can disciple effectively, right? Look at Christ. You say 12? Well, really, there was different groups within that. Peter, James, and John, right? They were typically the closest. And so it's very difficult to disciple 30 youth simultaneously. It's very difficult. And so I need people who we can work as a team, because we are in the discipleship business. That's what I'm trying to call it. Cultivate recursive discipleship. So recursive meaning it is going to repeat, right? It's going to repeat. So, we pour into some of you. You pour into some others. They pour into some others. If we're talking tactics, one of the things that's kind of on my heart, and I hope to try, is I'd like to have a youth worship team. I'm going to pluck or attempt to commandeer some leaders from the adult worship team, because, youth ministry isn't its own independent church. It's part of this church. And so there's lots of connections we can make by taking youth and connecting them with fellow disciples. A technical team, perhaps, although many of our technical folks, thanks Kyle, you've been on the ball, are quite young. Outreach teams, right? Why have the adult leaders do all the work and plan an event when there's such a great opportunity to bring youth alongside and help them actually plan those kinds of things?
I'm so glad you're able to join us today in worship. If you have a need, a prayer request, feel free to reach out to us at the church here. You can give us a call, or you can also email us. God bless you.